All right, I've got 6:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight, we'll start with a few prayer requests like we do every Wednesday night. Just keep Dory and Frank Liebarger in your prayers. She's still in recovery here at the rehab here at the rehab center here in Greenbrier. Some of you may have heard. I think it was this past Saturday night. Lisa Wilcox's dad passed away. He's kind of been on a long journey over the last few months, and he passed away this Saturday night. So keep Lisa and her family and Robert and Heather and all of them in your prayers as they're dealing with that this week and kind of going through that process. And then Derek Job, who was here last week, told me after service that he missed our prayer time, but I believe it's his dad, Jimmy Job, has been in the hospital. I believe it was a stroke. I need to check back in with him, but was not doing well for a while, and then was able to recover a little bit and is doing a lot better today. So keep Jimmy or Derek's dad, Jimmy, in your prayers. And are there any more that we have tonight before we pray? Okay, any unspoken? Oh, yeah. Okay, Chuck Weaver has a knee replacement coming up on Friday. Are there any more? Yeah, Ronnie. Oh, really? Was it a knee? Okay. Gotcha. So Lori Liebarger had a knee replacement as well, and just another day in the hospital. Yeah, absolutely. We'll keep her in our prayers. Any others? Okay. What's your stepdad's name? David? Okay. We'll definitely keep him in our prayers, and all those others with COVID too. That I know there are several in our church, but also many in the hospital. Yes, ma'am. Ruby Victory. Okay. Yeah, is she in the hospital?
She's in rehab.
Okay. Ruby Victory had a stroke, is in rehab. Definitely keep all those in our prayers. Any others? Okay, any unspokens? If you just want to raise a hand. Okay, thank you. David Bradley, would you mind praying for us tonight to lead us off? Amen. Thank you, David. Just a couple of announcements. I wanted to go over. We introduced a new program, like a new text. It's called Text in Church program. This past Sunday, Pastor Steve was talking about it. I wanted to go over it just a few more times, make sure everybody was clear. This texting program is how we are going to be signing up for how we're going to have you guys sign up for our general updates from the church. And also, if you want to continue to be on the prayer chain, you can sign up using this Text in Church program. But if you get out your phones real quick, if you didn't do it Sunday or maybe you missed it, and you can save this number in your phone. It's 501, and I'll say it again, 501-830-4065. And I'll say that again in just a second in case you're getting your phone out or getting some pen and paper ready. But that number, you can text many different options to sign up for different things. If you'd like to sign up for our just general information that's going to be sent over text messages only, you can send to that number, no spaces, GNINFO. That's GNINFO. And that'll sign you up for general information, like maybe we have a service time changing, or if we have to dismiss Wednesday night for some reason, something like that, or we have something coming up that we want you to know about. We're going to send you a text message with that information. Another one for the prayer chain is just sign up for that, which is over email only. This will not be text; it'll just be emails. You can text to that number GN Prayer, no spaces. GN Prayer, no spaces. And then that will sign you up for those those prayer chain emails that we send out regularly. One thing that we really want that we didn't mention Sunday that you have to do is when you text one of those words to this number, it's going to send you a text message back with a link. And when you get that link, you have to go to that link and fill out the form there, or it won't sign you up for those things. Just texting the word will get you the information, but then you have to go to that link and sign up for that. It'll ask for your name, your phone number, and your email address, and that's it. We have to get that information so that we can send you those texts and emails. And then finally, the last one that I know a lot of people are interested in this one. If you'll text to that number, taxes, TAXES, and then fill out the link that it sends you, that will sign you up to get your 2021 giving report. We will email that to you, and any money that you gave in the year of 2021, we'll get you that report for tax purposes. So I'm going to say that number one more time. Let me get it pulled up. It's 501-830, no, you're fine, 501-830-4065. That's 501-830-4065. And all of those things are on the slides on Sunday mornings, or you can even go to our Facebook page, and you can go through the live stream, and it'll be there on the live stream. We're going to be posting those tomorrow as well, if you want to look for them there. But we're going to be transitioning all of our information and all of our prayer chain stuff to those. So if you want to continue getting prayer chain and information, emails and text messages, you need to sign up through this app, because over the next month, we're going to be making that transition. One more announcement before we get started. There's a new Sunday school class starting this upcoming Sunday. My mom, Lynette Thrasher, is going to be starting it, and it's going to be in the boardroom, and there's already been a sign-up for it. I think she capped it at 20 people. So if you didn't catch it this time, she's going to be doing it again. So just keep an eye out for it, because she'll be doing it again periodically throughout the upcoming months. But it's a 6-week Sunday school class, and if you signed up for it, it's going to be in the boardroom right here, which is if you go out of the sanctuary, take a left. It's that first door on the right across from the offices. So it's got a bunch of tables set up, and that's where her Sunday school class is going to be starting at 9:30 this upcoming Sunday. And I believe that's a 6-week study that she's doing on how to read the Bible, and she's really excited about that, and I think that's going to be really good. So looking forward to what's going to be coming out of that class. But tonight we're starting a new study on the Church of the Nazarene. And we talked about a little bit last week about what this study was going to be entailing, and I've really been looking forward to starting this over the last week. And I asked you guys, if you'll remember, and the box is still out there, I asked y'all to write questions about the Church of the Nazarene that you may have that you would like answered over the next 8 to 10 weeks, somewhere around there. And I got some really good questions. One in particular was a great question that really is going to help us give us a good starting point that we're going to start with tonight. And I actually I got a couple other questions that I think were probably put in by the senior pastor, because one of them was when I'm going to start having kids, so I'm pretty sure, and it was his girly handwriting, so I'm pretty sure that it was from him. And he also put a couple others in there that were really interesting that we're not going to address tonight, but I'm going to give you a little hint because we will address these coming up. But two of the questions in there were, what's the Church of the Nazarene's stance on medical marijuana? It was actually medical pot was on the card. And then, what's the Church of the Nazarene's stance on tattoos? And so those are both fall under what I would categorize as social issues. So we're going to spend one of these weeks, one night, in this study on the Church of the Nazarene, and we're going to look at the Church of the Nazarene's stance on social issues, different social issues that you may be interested in. So that's a little teaser. Y'all keep coming, and I'm really looking forward to this week. Every single week we're going to be looking either at the history of the Church of the Nazarene, or the theology and doctrine of the Church of the Nazarene, or even we may take one night, because I used to do this in my small group and I loved it. We may take one night, we may just talk about the history of our church, because it's really interesting and it's fun and it's specific to who we are, not as a denomination, but as our local church. But before we dive into what was my favorite question that was in the box, I want to spend some time discussing why we're doing this study. And why I believe that learning about the Church of the Nazarene and our beliefs and our theology, why that's important. Several years ago, when Melanie and I started the small group in our home that was kind of looking at the theology and the beliefs of the Church of the Nazarene, I was going through the ordination process at that time. I was taking classes all the time. It felt like it was never-ending classes for the ordination process. And during that time, as I was taking those classes that pastors take, learning what the church believes, learning how to preach and things like that, I began to realize that even though I had grown up my entire life in this church and in the Church of the Nazarene, I didn't know a whole lot about our theology and about what we believed and why we believed that. And that's important for us to know because we're all here tonight. We're all in this church. We all come to this church. We've chosen to come here for a specific reason. And it could be one of a million reasons. When Melanie and I were doing that small group, and we had about 60 people come through it total, everyone that we would always ask the first night, why do you come to our church? Why do you keep coming? Why have you come for 20 years? Why have you come for 2 weeks? What is it about our church that makes you want to come? And everybody had a different reason for wanting to be a part of what we're doing here at Greenbrier Nazarene. And not a single person, and I was trying to think through to see if that was a lie or not, but to my best recollection, not a single person said, I started coming to Greenbrier Nazarene because I really just love the Nazarene theology and doctrine. That was never said. Like, I'm not coming to this church because I love their doctrine. But what everyone shared was they were taking our class because they wanted to know more about it. And I think that it's important for us, if we go to a specific church, if we're a part of a specific denomination, it's important for us to be able to tell other people why we go to that church and what makes it different from other denominations and other churches. And also, and I'm just a little bit of a weirdo, so you'll have to bear with me, but I think that our theology, the theology and the doctrine of the Church of the Nazarene, is very special. And when you really start to dig into it and you look at the specific beliefs of our doctrine and that we're going to be looking at over the next few weeks, it's a beautiful theology. And I think that the beliefs of our church are specifically geared and they're pointed towards learning how to love others well. And so I hope that through this study, you not only learn about our beliefs in the Church of the Nazarene and as Christians in general, because we do share a lot of beliefs with other denominations and other belief systems. But I hope that over the next 10 weeks that you begin to maybe fall in love with our church and in what we say that we believe, because I do think that it's very special. But here's what I don't want you to take from the next 10 weeks. I don't want you to hear me ever saying, I don't want you to hear me say that being a Nazarene is the only thing that matters, and that I think that we're better than everybody else, because that's not the case, and that's a bad way to look at why we're going to a specific church for a reason. In fact, there's things about other denominations and their theology that I like more than ours sometimes, and there's also things in our doctrine and in our theology. More specifically, though, in our polity and how we govern our church, that I disagree with sometimes, that in just how our denomination is structured sometimes. But my goal for this next 10 weeks is not to say, hey, we're better than everybody else. Like, we think that we're kind of a tier above everyone. But my goal is for us to learn together more about who we are and our identity. And so I wanted you to leave this next 10 weeks, and when someone asks you why you go to that church and what is that church about, that you can tell them just a little bit more about who we are and what makes us different. I had a professor at the University of Arkansas, and it was a criminal justice class, and I think it was I was taking some what I thought was fun electives. So it was actually a crime scene investigation class. And it was really interesting, and it was an interesting semester. But what the professor said all throughout the semesters he's teaching us is he said that his goal wasn't to teach us how to be expert detectives or crime scene analysts, but his goal was to make us a good jury member if we were ever to be called up to be on a criminal jury. That was the goal of his class, to give us a critical eye so that if we were ever called to be on a jury, that we would be a good jury member. And that's, I think, the same goal that I kind of have for us over the next 10 weeks, because we're not going to double down and we're not going to learn how to be excellent top-tier Nazarene theologians and that shuns all other denominations and belief systems. But we're going to gain this basic understanding of who we are and what we believe. So with those goals lined out, I want to start at the beginning of this journey. And I don't know who put this question in the box. It wasn't me. But it was such a perfect question to start on. As soon as I read it, I was like, this is so great. But the question, one of the questions that was put in the box was this: what's the significance of Jesus of Nazareth and the name of the Church of the Nazarene? Or why did they pick that name, Nazarene? Why did the founders of our denomination kind of go out of their way to emphasize the fact that Jesus was from Nazareth? He was a Nazarene. And so I spent a lot of time over the last few days researching that question, because I kind of thought I had a good understanding of why they picked that name, but I also didn't want to just kind of cop out by saying, well, the name Church of Christ was already taken, and so we had to just go like a roundabout way of saying, oh, it's just the Church of, the Nazarene, kind of wink, wink, the Nazarene, Jesus. But as I did some more research on why this is our name, why we're called Church of the Nazarene, I found that it wasn't just an accident that they picked that. It wasn't just, that's kind of a name that's convenient that no one else has. But there was a lot of intentionality that went into choosing the name Nazarene, Church of the Nazarene. And there was also a clear movement of God and a clear discernment that went into the process of picking that name. And the founders of our denomination, They picked that name because they wanted to set a trajectory of what they hoped that the denomination would become. And so to answer that question fully, we really have to start before the denomination was founded. And it's this beautiful story. And as I tell it tonight, and I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritties, you don't have to worry about remembering all of these names or anything like that. There's not going to be some kind of test at the end of this study. But I want you to take away the foundation that the Church of the Nazarene was built on, what it was founded on. And that lies in the name Nazarene. Our denomination, and some of you may know this, was founded by a small group of pastors and lay people out of Los Angeles, California. And there were several in the group. It wasn't just one or two people that just decided they were going to start a church. It was a group of people, but there are two names that kind of stand out as being vital to the mission of that early group that would become the Nazarenes. And their names were Dr. J.P. Whitney and then Reverend Phineas Bresee. Now, some of you may know the name Phineas Bresee a little bit more than Dr. Whitney. But they were both originally Methodist pastors. And they had long pastoral tenures in the Methodist Church before they started the Church of the Nazarene. But Phineas Bresee and J.P. Whitney kind of faded into another denomination, was pastoring another church after the founding of our church. But Phineas Bresee went on to become the first general superintendent of the denomination. And he really is widely attributed with the founding of the church because he had the most pastoral experience, but also he had this great talent that was widely known for preaching. He was a preacher at heart. He was a great communicator that was almost like country renowned in the Methodist Church of how good of a pastor that he was. And even from the time that he was very young, he started preaching at his in his local congregation. When he felt the call into ministry, he began to preach on a preaching circuit in Iowa. And when I read that, I was like, what in the world is a preaching circuit? It was something that I had never heard of. And this was in the mid kind of 1800s. And what a preaching circuit was it was a group of about 4 or 5 churches that were kind of close together. Think maybe a county that would have like 5 or 6, or maybe 4 or 5 churches. And because these were rural churches and they weren't bringing in a lot of income, they couldn't they couldn't pay a pastor even a living wage, so they would all come together and they would all kind of share a pastor. And so the pastor would, and they called it preaching the circuit. He would go one week and maybe he would preach at this church and maybe that evening at another church. But each week he would preach at one, maybe 2 of these churches. He would give communion and he would travel that circuit. And that was his job, was to preach the circuit, to go around and to make sure that he was at these places. Usually the typical rule was at least once a month, to show that he show up in each one of these churches for at least once a month, preach and serve communion. And the rest of the time, the lay people may be in charge, or maybe there were some others that had stepped up, but he was only there for once every few months. So Phineas Brzee was preaching the circuit in Iowa. And I think 2 or 3 times he would maybe change his circuit, but he usually was stationed there in Iowa until one day something happens, and I don't really know all the details of it, but he feels this calling to go to Southern California. So he and his wife pick up, and this is, probably around 1870s, I would say, maybe 1880s. So they pick up and they move from Iowa to Southern California at this time. It's a big deal. It's obviously a clear calling from God. And when they go to California, he's preaching a circuit there through the Methodist Church. So he's doing the same thing in California that he was in Iowa, going around each Sunday preaching to a different church. And there's this biographical film that the Church of the Nazarene produced a couple of years ago about the life of Phineas Brzee. And I was talking to Katie, I almost just showed it tonight because it's 45 minutes long and it does much better job of telling all this than I could. But it shows this moment when he's in California of him and his wife in a church where he is discerning this clear call, this clear kind of heartache for the poor in the city there in Los Angeles. Los Angeles at that time, but still today, was a city of immigrants. It was a place where people from all races, all backgrounds, all kinds of income level had come together, and it still is kind of that way today. And there were, and there still are, but even in that time, there was the outrageously wealthy living not very far from the poorest of poor people. And in the midst of that, Pastor Brzee's heart broke for those who were experiencing poverty. And in the film, it kind of shows this moment in a church where he says, "My heart is aching for the poor." And it wasn't too long after he started to sense that discernment when he was given this opportunity to work in a mission. And it was called the Pinal Mission. And this would be a partnership where he would help feed the hungry and minister to the poor, and he was to offer spiritual assistance. But to take this on full time, he was going to have to give up his role as a pastor in the Methodist Church. And so he stepped away from the pastoral ministry to be a part of this mission because he felt this conviction to serve the poor and the needy so deep within his soul. And so every day, they were feeding the hungry. And the story kind of goes is that as Pastor Brzee, who was a preacher at heart, this great communicator, as he's feeding the poor, he's talking to them, and he begins to feel this urge to preach. He wants to preach to them. And he was, of course, speaking on Sunday mornings at the mission where they would hold kind of a church service. But throughout the week, he felt this urge to preach during lunchtime or during dinner. And it ended up he started to get a little crossways with his other partners there in the mission because they felt like that time was specifically to feed people, and he was using it as this time to minister and to preach. And so they started to get a little crossways over what's the goal Monday through Friday, and should we keep the preaching just to Sunday? And after some time of disagreement, they decided to part ways, and he was actually asked to leave that mission. And as he stepped away from that mission, there was this sense of anguish. There was a sense of being lost because he knew that he could always go back to the Methodist Church. He hadn't burned any bridges, but he also knew that he had this clear calling from God to serve the poor there in the Los Angeles area. And so not too long after he's dismissed from the Pinal mission, he's then approached by a group of people that included Dr. J.P. Whitney. And they approached Phineas Bresee about starting a new ministry in the Los Angeles area. And as they talked to Phineas Bresee about what this ministry would look like, he saw that it was going to mirror the work that he was already doing there in the mission. Because this was a group of people that had come together who had a heart for the poor in Los Angeles and had a sole focus on serving them. And so this group kind of took off. They started their own missions. They started their own kind of soup kitchens and things like that to minister to the poor and the needy in the area. Then they started a church, and they started a ministry after ministry, and slowly their reach began to grow throughout the city. And they were focused on two things, this group of people. They were focused, one, on serving the poor, and two, on spreading a powerful message of holiness. And in the film that I was talking about a second ago, it ends with this spectacular moment where Dr. Whitney kind of comes up to Phineas Bresee in a barn, and Phineas Bresee is kind of picking up straw, and he's cleaning up this nasty barn. And Dr. Whitney brings a newspaper and begins to read an article from it to Phineas Bresee. And the article, that was a Los Angeles newspaper, called them a new denomination with a focus on evangelistic and city mission work, spreading the doctrine and experience of Christian holiness. But the paper said that they didn't have a name for this new denomination. And the paper was the first time, the first thing that even mentioned that they were starting something that could be seen as a Christian denomination, a group of churches. And that phrase that was in the newspaper, that they're spreading the doctrine and experience of Christian holiness, kind of made me step back. Because doctrine and experience in that sentence are two things that are inseparable. And we're going to get into what holiness is probably next week. But the doctrine of holiness is a doctrine that calls us to be holy as Christ is holy, to reflect the love of Jesus in everything that we do. And holiness is the primary focus, the primary belief system of the Church of the Nazarene. What our church is called is it's known as a Wesleyan holiness church. And if we're even to dig into our roots here on this piece of ground, before we were known as the Greenbrier Church of the Nazarene, we were known as the Greenbrier Holiness Church when we were founded in 1904. And what that phrase tells me, the doctrine and the experience of holiness, is that our belief in holiness and also our love for the poor and our serving the poor and needy, our doctrine and our actions are inseparable. Because if we say that we believe that we are called to be holy as Christ is holy, and that we are called to reflect Christ in a way that truly does look like the Jesus that we see in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, then we begin to find ourselves in similar situations as to what Jesus found himself in, looking at people who are in desperate need. Not only spiritual needs, but physical and emotional needs as well. If we are truly holy, If the church is truly holy, then we will fulfill those needs in the same way that the church can fulfill those spiritual needs. And that was exactly the way that Phineas Bresee and J.P. Whitney saw their mission and the beginnings of this denomination. That was the same way that they viewed this thing that they were starting there in Los Angeles. Not long after the newspaper article came out that didn't have a name for this new denomination, Dr. Whitney came to Bresee and said that he had been praying about a name for their new church, and that he was given the name of this new church in a dream, which just sounds kind of crazy. I had a weird dream last night. I'll tell you all about it afterwards, but it was crazy. It was about this. I'll go ahead and tell you that right now. So I'm pretty comfortable. This is a Steve Thrasher moment. That's what I'm going to call it. I'm pretty comfortable with this information. Like, I led this small group for a couple years. And so I thought yesterday, I was finishing everything up, and I thought I'll just do some general bullet points, and I'll get through this sermon. Usually I write every word down. Like, every word that I say that comes out of my mouth is written down. So I thought I'll do some general bullet points, I'll make it. Then last night I had this dream that I was standing exactly right here, and everything just totally went crazy. Like, there were people running, and I was trying to give this message using my bullet points, and everything just went crazy. And people were running, and I forgot most of it, and I woke up and I thought, I'm going to need to write every word down. So anyways, now get back to where I was. So not long after that newspaper article came out, he comes Dr. Whitney comes to Phineas Bresee and says that he's been given the name of their new denomination in a dream. And he said that he wanted this name to reflect the work that they were doing in Los Angeles with the poor. And he said that the new denomination was going to be called the Church of the Nazarene. Now, you may know if you've studied Nazareth, or if you've studied the story of Jesus, that Nazareth, where Jesus came from, was a town that was widely known in the area for being a town of the poor and the marginalized. It was a town where immigrants lived, and where those in poverty were lived. And it was kind of one of those towns that you didn't want to be from. And so the fact that we know that Jesus was from Nazareth, that Jesus was a Nazarene, is intentional there in the Gospels. They want you to know where he was from. He was from that part of town that nobody wanted to be from. So J.P. Whitney and Phineas Bresee took on this name of Nazarene to reflect their goal, the goal of their ministry in the church, to serve the poor and the marginalized populations. It was right there in the name. And the documentary that I was watching said this, and I'm going to quote. It says that it symbolized the lowly and toiling mission of Jesus. The name Church of the Nazarene symbolizes that we are linked with Christ to the struggling heart of the world. With that name, these who started our denomination some 114 years ago were symbolizing that the Church of the Nazarene was going to be a church where people of all genders, people of all races, and people of all classes would sit side by side. And this was a quote as well. They said, "Where the righteous and the drunkard, the high-class lady and the prostitute would come together in one place to embrace the holy life." It was with the name Church of the Nazarene that they committed the denomination to a way of service and a way of life. And this mission that started there in the name has continued to be the goal of our denomination over the last 114 years. As the Church of the Nazarene expanded around America, and then as it started to expand around the globe, which we're in like 7,454 countries. There's not even that many countries. We're everywhere. But as they started to expand around the globe, their focus was on compassionate ministries. When we meet for district assemblies, which is coming up in June, but even more when the whole church around the world comes together for General Assembly every 4 years, which is coming up here in just a couple of years in 2023, It always amazes me to hear of the work that is being done around the world. Around our state, yes, around our country, but around the world, where this kind of work that is there in our name, Church of the Nazarene, is being done. When the Church of the Nazarene would go into a third world country or a third world area for the first time, they wouldn't just build a church. But usually they would build a church, a school, and a hospital everywhere that they went. And so they would cater to the physical needs of people just as much as they were catering to the spiritual needs of people. And you've heard me say this before, but they would do that because the gospel message has to be good news today, not just good news for when we've died. And so think about it. If you're starving, you're probably not very interested in hearing about a Savior that will help you only after you die. You're probably more concerned about not starving anymore. And so the Church of the Nazarene would say, yes, these people have spiritual needs that we are going to tend to, but we're also going to tend to their physical needs, to their education, and to their emotional needs. And throughout its history, the Church of the Nazarene, our denomination, has taken seriously that calling to reflect Christ everywhere that they go. Not just with their beliefs, not just what they say they believe, but in their actions. They recognize, and we still recognize today here, that the church isn't the church if it's not ministering to the sick, the poor, and the marginalized. I was listening to a podcast last week, and it was actually a podcast that one of my buddies hosts. And he had one of our general superintendents, Dr. Carla Sundberg. If you don't know what general superintendent is, keep coming. We'll talk about it one of these weeks. But it's like one of the big wigs in our denomination, one of the 6 leaders of our denomination. And he interviewed Dr. Carla Sundberg. And in this interview, she was talking about her years of ministry and her years of experience. And if you don't know anything about her, I would definitely look her up because she's really interesting and one of my favorite general superintendents. But her and her husband served for many years as missionaries in Russia. And I shared the story that she told on this interview with our staff yesterday, but she told this story of when they were first starting one of the churches there in Russia. And they went to basically the mayor of this region. And the region held, I think she said, like 2 to 3 million people in it. So it's a big region. It's a substantial region. And they went to the director of this region and they said, we'd like to start a church. Can you kind of help us out? And he said, this is 2 to 3 million people here. He said, there's not a single church in this region, and I have no idea why we would even need one. And he said, so no, I'm not going to help you any. If you want to do it, I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to give you any assistance. And so they left and took some time, and after months, or I don't know how long it was, of hard work and building a ministry there in that region, they were able to find a building that they could gather in as the church. And she told that after they got a building, they had several ladies who were hairdressers and wanted to open up a beauty shop there in the church building that they could run Monday through Friday. And Carla said, well, we weren't really doing anything else in that building Monday through Friday. So we said, yeah, sure. And she said that we asked them to 3 days a week run their business, to charge normally like they would. But 2 days a week, we wanted them to give free haircuts. And that was just going to be a little ministry that they could use that space for. And so she said, we took these coupons, and it said free haircut, and it had an appointment time on there. And we took them to the regional director. And we said, hey, when you run into somebody who has a need, or if you're helping somebody out, give them one of these coupons for a free haircut. And she said immediately when they opened, every day that they were given free haircuts, there was a line out the door. And she said this went on for some time, that they're giving these free haircuts out. And it wasn't too long before there was somebody in the region whose house burned down, and they were in desperate need. And she said, I got a call on my cell phone one day, and it was that same regional director saying, hey, would you mind helping out this family? And she said that just shows that transition of we don't need a church to what the church should be. Because the church just as a building where people come to listen to someone else preach, to that regional director, it wasn't of any use to his community. But a church that was focused on helping the needy people and being there for the poor and being there for the marginalized was valued because they were making a difference in his community. And that's really, this kind of discovery of the history of our name has been sitting heavily with me this week. And it's challenged me, and I hope that it challenged you. And I don't know if it was just our Advent devotional that we came out of a few weeks ago, or if it's some of the conversations that we've been having as our staff and just around the office, and some things that are kind of coming up over the horizon that we're planning for. But I feel like our church is, and we were talking yesterday in our staff meeting about this. I feel like our church is at this turning point where we're about to take that next step of faithfulness to learn what it really means to be the church in Greenbrier, Arkansas. And what my hope is for us, what my hope is for you, what my hope is for our congregation, our community, I hope that we conduct ourselves in such a way that we are worthy to be called Nazarenes. That we love on our community and the people around us in such a way where there's no separation between what we say we believe and how we carry ourselves. Every time that we drive past our church sign, every time that we gather here together, every time that we tell somebody where it is that we go to church, I hope that we're reminded that we have a mission to reflect the Jesus that came from Nazareth. The dirty, stinky, poor, immigrant-laden Nazareth. And since he came to the poor there in Nazareth, we go there also. Now, I'm going to love this study as we continue it over the next few weeks. We're going to dive into, probably next week, we're going to dive deep into what it means to be Wesleyan Holiness Church. And so we're going to really look at what it means to be holy, what we say we believe, and as we do that, as we talk about doctrine, as we talk about what we say we believe is the Church of the Nazarene, I hope we're constantly thinking, am I living that out? Am I living out the things that I say that I believe? Now, don't forget, write your questions, because that was a really good one. And I don't know who put it in there, but that was a good one. So write some questions, put them in the box. If you're watching online with us tonight, you can message me or message the church your questions. But this is going to be a lot more fun the more questions that y'all put in there. And we'll get to the medical marijuana here in a few weeks, I promise. All right, but let me pray for us, and we'll dismiss. Dear God, we know that just our denomination and our doctrine doesn't make us special in your eyes. God, we know that we're not better than anybody else because of a book, of a manual that we follow that has our codes and our policies in it. God, but as we learn about who we are, God, I pray that you continue to transform us. Lord, tonight, we've looked at what even our name means. And it's given me, and I hope it's given everyone else who has heard this as well, a heavy burden. A burden to look at what we're doing, to see if we are even worthy of holding your name, God, of holding the name Nazarene, holding the name of the Nazarene. God, I pray that as we go from this place tonight, that we continue to be convicted. I pray that we continue to search out how we can minister to the poor and the marginalized around us. God, our eyes continue to be open to what you're doing around in the world And God, once again, we pray that we can just be a part of that. God, as we learn more about what it means to be a part of this church, I pray that you teach us, but also that you grow us so that we can reflect your Son more and more. We thank you so much for this time together. We thank you for those and pray for those prayers that were mentioned before, God. And we pray for all of those who are sick and couldn't be here tonight. We are so thankful for those that are joining us online when they may not be able to be here. And God, we ask these things in your name. Amen. Y'all are dismissed. Don't forget the questions.